today we are lucky, blessed, whatever word you want to use, as to have somebody on who has an equally astute understanding and analysis when it comes to these issues. He has been on this program before, had a fantastic program with him. His name is Zaid Hamid, and his website is brasstacktv.pk, which I highly suggest that you visit. Now, I invited my good friend Zaid on the program today because, as I have tried to point out, particularly in the last week or two, ladies and gentlemen, with the events taking place in Egypt right now, we need to pay very careful attention, because these things could have repercussions that would go on not just for months or years, but possibly decades. I was speaking with a good friend of mine yesterday about the situation. He is a Palestinian, and he is someone I consider to be an expert when it comes to understanding the situation in the Middle East. And he said, I've had to be very careful over what I have said concerning the situation in Egypt. I've been walking on eggshells for the last 2 weeks because everybody is so excited about this. He says, but I know that there is more to this. He said this thing could turn out to be an absolute disaster. Now, certainly we are not hearing anything like that from the mainstream press. If you look at the mainstream press, particularly in America, they are celebrating what is taking place in Egypt. This is one of the things that I pointed out at the beginning of this thing that happened about 3 weeks ago, is to watch where the press takes it. That's how you'll know whether or not interested parties really are worried about where it is all going. And the fact of the matter is, as I pointed out, the press has been absolutely celebratory about this. Whether it has been Christian Amanpour or any of the other mainstream commentators that we see on the media here in the United States, they haven't been wringing their hands. They haven't been scratching at furrowed eyebrows or anything like that. They've been on the streets interviewing people, and in general, there has not been any sense of worry over what's going to happen. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know for sure what today's guest is going to say, but I have a pretty good idea based upon what I know of his work. So I'm just going to go ahead and bring him up and let him kind of bring all of us up to speed, at least as far as his, what I consider to be expert opinion is on the matter. So, Zaid Hamid, thank you for coming on the program all the way from Pakistan.
Mark, you're most welcome. It's my pleasure to be with you once again. And may God bless you and to all your listeners.
Thank you, thank you. We all appreciate that. Zaid, why don't you just let us know what your bird's eye view of the situation in Egypt is. Take your time letting us, walking us through this process. Is this what it appears to be, or is there something that we need to be worried about with all of this upheaval we see taking place?
Mark, if I be very honest with you, in the last 100 years, the times in which we are living now are perhaps the most sinister and evil plans are being unfolded as we speak. And after the First World War, you would remember the history that they actually divided the Middle East into the 57 states that you see today. Mm-hmm. The maps of the Middle East were redrawn after the First World War. This is something that you do not hear in the history books. You hear about the Germans, you hear about the war in Europe, but what you don't hear is that there was one Muslim state in the beginning of the 20th century called the Ottoman Empire, mm-hmm. which stretched on one side into Russia, and on the other hand, it was into the Eastern Europe and right on to the North Africa. So it was the one single Muslim empire. And then after the First World War, it was actually balkanized into creating the modern states as you see today. Saudi Arabia was taken out, Iraq, Jordan, Syria, all these countries as nations, as countries, did not exist before the First World War. Right. They were all part of one Muslim Ottoman Empire. Mm-hmm. And it was after this, once the dismemberment of the Ottoman Empire took place, it was the British Empire which wrote to Rothschilds telling them that we have dismembered the Ottoman Empire and now we are going to create the state of Israel in the middle of Palestine. And these are historical documents on record that Lord Rothschild was the recipient of the letter from the British government informing them that the state of Israel would now be created by the British Empire. So it took another war for them to be actually able to create the state of Israel. After the Second World War, immediately Israel, you know, that was created as a state in the heart of Muslim Middle East, in the heart of Palestine. And ever since, till today, we have this cancer in the middle of us. Now, stopping here, I will take you into the 90s. After the Soviet misadventure in Afghanistan, the war in which the Soviet Union met their Waterloo, the war in which triggered the demise of the Soviet Union and the rollback of the Soviet Empire, that was the period when the world actually started to unfold the world that you see today. And since that time, the strategy of the dominant neocon evangelicals or Zionists has been to dismember the hostile states into smaller components. Remember this. Dismember the large hostile states into smaller countries. See today. And since that time, the strategy of the dominant neocon evangelicals or Zionists has been to dismember the hostile states into smaller components. Remember this. Dismember the large hostile states into smaller countries. The maps of this Middle East and this greater region, greater Middle East, were redrawn after the First World War. After nearly 90 years, the maps are being redrawn into smaller states. First, Soviet Union was dismembered. Then they came closer to home in Europe. Yugoslavia was dismembered. Yugoslavia and Soviet Union are no more countries. Soviet Union was the largest, most powerful military. Yugoslavia was the fifth largest army in the world. But both the countries do not exist today. So, after the 90s, post 9/11, they had their direction toward the Middle East, removing the threat of the Soviets. Now the American foreign policy, American neocons were free to move in the Middle East and the greater Middle East. And that is why you find them coming into Afghanistan and then into Iraq. Now, remember one thing. The strategy now is to create headless states, dismember them into smaller components, and create enough anarchy in the region that they are not able to pose any resistance to the organized state of Israel. So all the major Muslim countries in the Middle East are being dismembered. Their maps are being redrawn. Giving you the example of Iraq first. Iraq has already been dismembered into 3 administrative regions. The Kurdistan is almost autonomous in the north. The Sunni region is where the violence is. And a Shia state is being created in the south. They have sham elections, sham democracy, where their stooges like Chalabis and Zilmeh Khalilzad and these kind of characters keep on appearing. And so they have a facade of so-called democracy, but actually it's under occupation and being dismembered, and the entire wealth robbed, and Iraq is no more a threat to Israel anymore. Now, remember this, that Saddam Hussein was an ally of the Americans. They used him to contain the Iranian revolution, but once the job done, they went in, they softened him up in 92. So they took 10 years to soften Iraq up, and after 10 years almost, they moved in physically and dismembered it, hanged him up, actually ended up sending him to gallows. Now, after Iraq, one which you are not noticing, which you are not hearing in the mainstream media, is that another Muslim country in Africa has already been dismembered. Can you guess which one? Sudan.
Exactly, yes.
Sudan is a huge Muslim land. And the southern Sudan had oil. And now they have plans to divide Sudan into 3 regions. That's why you hear so much of noise about Darfur region and the southern Sudan. And then the northern Sudan would actually remain a chunk of Muslim territory with no oil, no resources, because the resources area of Darfur and southern Sudan have already been dismembered. The referendum has taken place very silently, very stealthily, without making a noise in the media. In the background, another Muslim land has been dismembered. Before that, Somalia. It was another Muslim land, and already Somalia has become a failed, headless, dysfunctional state. Now, coming back to Pakistan before that, President Musharraf used to be a very close ally to the Americans, to the neocons. But once they wanted to move to the second phase of the plan, which means softening up Pakistan for the balkanization, for the Yugoslavia option, they had to bring democracy. The corrupt, incompetent people who would do fiscal mismanagement, financial mismanagement, would be corrupt, would be totally stooges of the Americans, to create an environment where you could take away Pakistan's nuclear assets, create so much of anarchy through terrorist insurgents and Al-Qaeda elements, so much of anarchy that the world would be galvanized to say that Pakistan is a failed state and its nuclear weapons should be taken away by the world community. So this environment is, as we speak, is going on in Pakistan right now. So an American-sponsored democracy was brought after replacing an American ally, because the phase 2 of the project had to begin in Pakistan. They used Musharraf for 7 years, and once they decided to get into the high gear, they removed their ally and then brought in a more corrupt, incompetent government, which is now responsible for making Pakistan almost into a dysfunctional state. Now, this is exactly what they're doing with Egypt now. There was enough anger in Egypt. For 30, 35 years, that man was ruling. He was a pro-Israel, pro-American dictator. But he was 83 years of age. And the emotions and the anger in the Egyptian society against him were growing. So Americans needed a better stooge to create an environment where they would bring so-called democracy in Egypt, but in reality, democracy would be as incompetent and corrupt as we have in Pakistan today. Zardari is the most corrupt man in this world living today. And he was made Pakistan's president along with his cronies so that they do what the IMF and the World Bank tells them to do, while the CIA and the Americans and the Blackwaters and the NATO allow Indians and the CIA to operate in Pakistan to create a dysfunctional failing state. Same strategy for Egypt. It's not just that I'm saying this. The Telegraph, the British newspaper, Telegraph has recently run a full story on this, how CIA has taken 3 years to orchestrate this Egyptian so-called revolution.
Exactly.
Now, what happened is, now you saw what happened. The moment these protests came out on the street, from the second day, the language of the U.S. Foreign Office was, we want democracy in Egypt, Hosni Mubarak should go away. Immediately, without even wasting a day, they abandoned their ally for last 40 years.
Yes.
And then straight away, the man who came out from nowhere to replace Hosni Mubarak was Mr. Al-Baradi. And you remember this Mr. Al-Baradi is the head of for 10 years was the head of IAEA, International Atomic Inspection Commission. And he was the man responsible for scouting the entire Iraqi countryside, every town, every city, to make sure that Iraq did not have any weapons of mass destruction. But still, America invaded Iraq on the pretext that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. So Al-Baradi works very close with the CIA. His history has been, he was the point man for the CIA to work against Pakistan's and Iranian nuclear program. He was the man who worked against the Iraqi nuclear program, against the Libyan and the Syrian nuclear program. Primarily under the facade of IAEA, he was making sure that no Muslim state should have nuclear weapons. And in Egypt, you saw that immediately. He was not even in the country. He didn't even exist in Egypt. But the moment the protest started, Al-Baradi landed, and immediately the Western media gave him the projection as the point man who's running this revolution. Yeah? And behind Al-Baradi, you have another character waiting in line, just like Chalabi in Iraq. The other character is Mr. Amar Musa. He was the Secretary General of the Arab League. Again, a man who was heavily tilted towards the CIA and the West. So, but the problem is that while while they were orchestrating this massive so-called movement against Hosni Mubarak, they were also afraid that Egyptian society has a huge presence of Islamists in it. And in case of a free and fair democracy, there would definitely be very high probability that Islamists would sweep to power. And this is something they could not take any chances with. So they have, basically what they have done is, while the American Foreign Office and Hillary Clinton and Mr. Obama was demanding democracy, what has happened is a martial law has been imposed in Egypt today. A military council has suspended the constitution. They have taken over and they say we'll rule for 6 months, and after that we will see if the environment is set, we might go for election. In other words, the dictatorship of a man has been replaced by a dictatorship of the army generals. And who have, first announcement they have made is the policies of Egypt towards Israel and US would remain unchanged. So basically what has happened is that they have taken the steam out of the emotions of the people. They have hijacked the entire emotional mindset, the anger of the Egyptian people. They have replaced one weak, hated man and replaced him with unknown faces. You don't know who's the president of Egypt today. You don't know who's the prime minister. You don't know who's ruling Egypt today. Egypt has officially become a headless state. See? And the next 6 to 8 months, they are going to buy the media. They are going to buy the power groups, the civil society groups, the NGOs. Americans will move in. Israelis are already there in heavy presence. And once they would create more social friction, war between Christians and Muslims, the sectarian war between various sects of Muslims will be created exactly the way they did in Iraq. And once the Egyptian society starts to disintegrate, become polarized, once the Egypt starts to become, and the corruption, because of the corruption, the economy starts to collapse, then they would call in an election which would create more anarchy, more chaos, something like that. And in that confusion and melee, because the Egyptian armed forces have already compromised. The Egyptian military leadership is strongly pro-Israel, they are strongly pro-American, and they have hijacked this entire people's movement of sentiment. And people, of course, made fool of completely at the first place. Because they were made to believe if they can come out in numbers, they can overthrow Egypt and bring a popular democratic government, which we saw has neither happened nor would happen. But the phase which Egypt is going through right now is the phase where Pakistan went through 3 years ago when they removed Pervez Musharraf from Pakistan. So this is a multiple access campaign in the entire Middle East, in every Muslim country, to remove the favorite dictator who has served them well, was a useful idiot for so many years, replace him with a collection of idiots and a group of stooges who would basically bring the collapse of their country within, soften the country up. Just like after the First World War, after the First Gulf War, they had embargoes on Iraq. They had so much restrictions, so that Iraq was softened up. For 10 years, Iraq had absolutely no imports, no exports, no trading, nothing. The economy collapsed, the military was weakened up, and after that, when they were fully satisfied, they moved in with their forces. So similarly now, Pakistan and Egypt are two large Muslim countries. Pakistan is already a nuclear weapon state. That's why they brought in democracy of this level, so that Pakistan may implode from within. And the same strategy they will apply in Egypt also. So that Egyptian society may implode, because Egypt is a powerful Arab country. And what will happen is, once the Egyptian society becomes weak, like Iraqis, Israel can move into the Sinai desert and retake it. Israel wants to expand to the Sinai desert. So, and these are now the reshaping of the maps that you will see in the coming months. They are trying to create schism between the Coptic Christians and the Muslims in Egypt also. So there are talks of dividing Egypt on north and south axis, also the way they have divided Sudan on the Christian-Muslim axis. Okay? So this is actually what is happening. Henry Kissinger has openly said that whatever is happening in Egypt is the first act of the dramas to be unfolded in the Middle East in the near future. Okay? So we know the game that is happening. To put it very simply, it is, in their language, the reshaping of the greater Middle East. It is redrawing of the map.
Zaid,
it is redrawing of the maps on sectarian, ethnic, linguistic, geographic, on various axes. So this is what we see. What events in Egypt are highly explosive. They're extremely dangerous. You can't break countries like this. You can't break nations like this. This creates a turmoil of unimaginable magnitude, like you see in Iraq, where almost 1.5 million people have already died in the last 6 years, and 4 million have been made refugees in the neighboring country. The next country, which would be their target, would be Syria, because that again, Syria poses a major threat to Israel. And then, of course, they'll move on to Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan remains their prime target, and Iran, of course.
Zaid, let me ask you something very quickly. When we look at the comments that have been in Lebanon and Ahmadinejad in Iran, they have been championing this revolution in Egypt. These clearly are not stupid men. They have to know that what you know and what we're talking about here. What could be their possible motive for coming out and publicly cheering for something which they must suspect, in the back of their minds at least, is being done to further balkanize, as you said, the Middle East, and eventually could wind up on their own doorstep?
You see, Iran had Iran had war with Iraq for 10 years, and they hated Saddam Hussein, obviously, understandably, because Saddam has been the aggressor against the Iranian revolution too. But the point is that Saddam, no matter how cruel he was, no matter what kind of dictator he was, at least Iraq was far better off than it is today, and that the fact remains obvious. And this is what happens, you see, that in Egypt, the people who came out, the million people who came into the Tahrir Square, were not the American agents, were not the CIA assets, were not the ones Americans or Israelis were counting upon. They were from the Muslim Brotherhood, Akhwan al-Muslimun. They were people who really genuinely wanted to bring a change. But this is where we are saying that is why they could never have democracy. Giving you the example of Algeria. In Algeria, about 20 years ago, they had elections, free democratic elections, where the Islamic Party like Akhwan al-Muslimun and FIS, they took majority. And when they were about to form the government, the Western government asked the armed forces to stage a coup and bring in a military rule, cancelling the elections, cancelling the results. And since that day till today, the elections and democracy have not come to Algeria. So basically, when the Iranian president or Nasrallah or these people supported the people, they supported Mubarak to go. But obviously, they have also given the statement, the Iranian government has given the statement that the West is trying to hijack these people's sentiments and emotions.
Right.
You see, we know this. We know that there's a struggle going on in Egypt right now. People have come out. The people who have created the environment to overthrow the Mubarak are Muslims, are ordinary people, are ordinary citizens, are good human beings. But the Egyptian armed forces remain loyal to the Israelis and the Americans. And that is why they are not holding any elections now. That is why they will never have any democracy in Egypt. That is why Egypt will maintain the policy course of the Anwar al-Sadat regime, of Hosni Mubarak regime, and even this headless government would also maintain the same course. So what the Iranians and the Muslims all over the world were supporting the people was, on first part, removal of Hosni Mubarak. But the second part is where every Muslim everywhere is angry, because everybody knows this change was brought by the people, but now this movement has been hijacked.
Yes, I agree with everything that you're saying. Iran and Hezbollah and some of these other entities that were supporting it at first, they had to do it. Like I said at the beginning of the program, this friend of mine who knew from the beginning, he knew that this was not what it appeared to be, but the exuberance and the optimism on the part of not just the Arabs themselves, but supporters of the Palestinians and the Egyptians, there would have been no way to make any headway with them to say, wait a minute, everybody calm down, slow down, let's look at this thing logically here. So you're correct in that, in my opinion, Zaid, that Ahmadinejad and some of the other players in this had to come out and say what they had to say. They were walking a very thin tightrope here. So let me ask you this then: what is next then? If we have military rule in Egypt for the next 6 months, as they're saying, then what do you see happening? My personal opinion is that there's going to be some young, dynamic leader who's going to come forward. He's going to have great teeth and great hair, and he's going to be very liberalized and westernized, and he's going to promise freedom for the Egyptians. But in general, he will be in Egypt and in Israel and America's back pocket. What do you see happening, realistically speaking here? I mean, is the army really going to just run things from here on out until we see the breakup of Egypt, or are we going to see more theatrics involved in it?
Mark, the phase through which Egypt is going through right now is very volatile, very unpredictable. It can go in many directions. And this is where the actual struggle is. There's one struggle between the Egyptian society itself. I mean, there are so many people in the Tahrir Square which are not willing to go home. The people who are still staying there. Now the army is changing mood, changing tone. Army is telling them, go home. The revolution has complete. We have taken over. Mubarak is gone, so you should go home. But the people who came out did not come for this. People came out for a real change. People came out for changes in policies of the Egyptian government. People came out for actual genuine freedom and liberty and genuine human rights. But nothing has changed. Even the government remains. The ministers are the same. The establishment is the same. Armed forces are the same. The few generals have basically asked Mubarak to leave, but they have taken over. So now there is a confrontation building within the Egyptian society itself. And the confrontation can be on multiple axes. Confrontation can be within the civil society itself, where the pro-Israeli, pro-American liberal groups, which would be mobilized now to confront the Islamists and more conservatives. The confrontation can be between the Islamists and the Egyptian armed forces. The confrontation can be between the armed forces itself, that which way to take Egypt. Because obviously there are many Egyptian nationalists also within the armed forces who do not like too much reliance on the United States or too much bend towards the Israelis. After all, it's the same Egyptian army which has fought Israel historically. And it was only after that, after the 74 war, when the Egyptians actually surprised the Israelis, that Israelis decided to engage the Egypt and go right under their skin, and so that they can plant traitors, so they can plant collaborators within the Egyptian armed forces, which would not be a threat for them in future. Then the investment at that time is paying off today. So right now, it's very difficult to say which way Egypt would go. But one thing is very clear. I can tell you this, Mark, now, that Egypt will be a weaker country. Egypt would be a country which would be fragmented, which would be more divided socially, financially, and ethnically and religiously. And whatever the weakening of the Egyptian society would take place, it is going to take Egypt towards the Yugoslavia option, or to the Iraq option, or to the Sudan option. So primarily this is what they are doing. Egypt was a solid society. Despite the fact there was one dictator, the country was united. It was one solid entity. But now they are going to fragment this. So again, as I'm saying, do not forget what they have done to Iraq, what they have done to Sudan, what they plan to do to Afghanistan, what they have done to Somalia already. This is what they have done to Yugoslavia and to Soviet Union. In the last 20 years, all these major countries have been dismembered into smaller states. And this is the new era. This is the new phase. This is the new way of warfare, called the fourth generation warfare. You weaken a society from within through financial mismanagement, corruption, insurgency, civil war, and then you finally weaken it to that level where the federation becomes loose and provinces or the regions declare independence. This is what is happening. This is where they're going to take Egypt now.
Since you mentioned this fourth generational war and a new way of making war, which is to weaken the society, we cannot neglect to mention that in the wake of this quote-unquote revolution in Egypt, one of the things that we are likely to see take place is a secularization of the country to the point where they will allow the They will allow the men to download pornography. They will allow the women to start acting like American pop stars and things like this. This is going to be the new freedom that comes to Egypt if Israel and America get their way. They will export the same types of societal and moral corruption that they have used successfully through other parts of the world in order to weaken the cohesiveness of that society. And this is one of the things, Zaid, that you and I had mentioned in the program that we did a few months ago, which is that we cannot forget the moral component to all of this. If you can weaken your enemy morally, then 9/10 of the battle is done in defeating him militarily. And this is something that we need to look for in the coming days and weeks when Egypt is, quote-unquote, basking in its freedom. You will see all sorts of changes happen to allow pornography into the country, to allow the young people to start mimicking their Western counterparts and things like that. Could you comment on that for a few moments?
I totally agree with you, Mark, because the strength of a Muslim society lies in its ideology and morality. And once you weaken the Islamic ideology and the strong moral and social values that knit a Muslim society together into family networks, into social networks, if you weaken that, the moment you start weakening the family network in a Muslim society, then that society is ready for a takeover through a foreign invasion.
Yes.
And this is exactly as I told you earlier they would do. For the next 6 months or even beyond, they are going to wage a massive information war on the Egyptian society, giving them the benefits of the Western democracy, Western society, Western liberalism, the women's libs, and the feminism. And all these civil society structures, education system, the media would be massively reprogrammed now. And even more, it was already during the Egyptian, Hosni Mubarak's time, but now it's going to be even on a faster track. I told you, whatever they are doing in Egypt, they have started doing it in Pakistan 3 years ago, when they brought in this government and democracy. So you can see what is happening in Pakistan today to exactly know what will happen in Egypt 3 years down the line. Mm-hmm. Pakistan is facing multiple insurgencies. Our media is heavily influenced by Western corrupt pornographic material and the Indian muck and filth from the Indian Bollywood film industry.
Yes.
And Pakistan's education system has been handed over to the Western universities. Pakistani textbooks are being written and designed by the Western universities right now. The education system has polarized the society completely. There are generations who have been brought up in an education system in a society where they cannot speak the local language, And this is what they have done to Pakistan. And they're working aggressively to achieve it. Financial corruption, mismanagement. Every day in Pakistan you have riots somewhere. People begging for literally the basics of water, electricity, power, gas. I mean, the things which are taken for granted. But people actually have to struggle every day and all across the country. So this is what they have reduced Pakistan to today. And this is what they are going to do to Egypt and to Syria and to other Muslim lands, which they are softening up now for this process, so they will not be able to resist a nuclear weapon armed state of Israel when it starts to expand into the Middle East for the Greater Israel. Amazing. The concept of Greater Israel, you have to keep in mind, Israel is the only country in the world which does not have defined boundaries. Since 1948 till today, every year the boundaries of Israel change. They annex more settlements, they remove the villages of the Palestinians, they annex their lands, build walls, redraw the boundaries. Constantly for the last 62 years, Israel's boundaries have been changing. And it has no defined boundaries. Any land which it can grab, whether within the defined boundaries today or even beyond, is Israel's land as per their map. Google the map, search for Greater Israel, and you'll see the map. You'll see where the Greater Israel stretches to, which Muslim countries come into those lands. And then you will know why they're doing it to this. The new phase, the 21st century, just exactly as 100 years ago, in the beginning of the 20th century, they redrew the Middle East, they drew the Middle East maps, breaking up the Ottoman Empire. Now they're further redrawing it, and all those lands which would resist or could pose a threat to state of Israel are targets. And as I said, whatever is happening in Pakistan today, they removed Musharraf, their ally, brought democracy. This is what they've done in Egypt. Remove their ally, a dictator. Trying to bring a democracy, but they cannot because Islamists are strong in Egypt. So before that, they have to dilute the ideology, they have to dilute the Muslim ethos, they have to dilute the Islamic social fabric, family network, and only then they would bring in that kind of democracy which they want to bring, which would actually weaken the Federation of Egypt.
Zaid, let's switch gears here for just a moment, and let's talk about Iran. Today and yesterday, the news is that we have protesters in the street talking about getting rid of Ahmadinejad, getting rid of the ruling party there. This was all too predictable, was it not?
Yes, you see, very understandable. I mean, we expected this. The Americans have been trying for many, many years now to stage some kind of internal coup in Iran, but they don't have any assets on ground, the real assets. Iran is one country you're aware of that doesn't have an American embassy there. An American embassy is always the nest of spies. American embassy is always the den, is the Satan's den, wherever they are. You know, in Pakistan, they have made the biggest embassy in the entire region, and they're constructing massive blocks inside, giving clear indications to the Pakistanis that Americans wish to stay here for indefinitely long time. And the man that we have, the Raymond Davis case, which you must have heard about it, the CIA Blackwater operative who killed people on the Pakistani streets and is now in jail, and the Americans are bearing down with all the pressure they have on the Pakistani government and society so that to declare him a diplomat, despite the fact that he came on a business visa and he was an undercover CIA Blackwater operative assassinating people and coordinating with terrorist groups. So when you have an embassy on ground, you can do these kind of stuff. In Iran, they have a problem. They have to come through second-hand sources. So they have been trying for many years now. And after these last elections of Ahmadinejad, they tried even at that time, but that fizzled out. And Iranians are pretty tough on that because they hang the protesters if they are confirmed that if they are working on behalf of the CIA. Yeah? And in Iran, if you know the history, for example, in the 50s, lots of young people have not even heard about it. But in the 50s, there was an elected popular government of Mossadegh in Iran. And Mossadegh was a nationalist. He had nationalized the entire oil fields and the oil companies, which are primarily the British Petroleum and the Western oil companies. So Teddy Roosevelt's grandson was sent by the CIA with suitcases full of dollars to stage a coup against Mossadegh. And he bought off people, groups, gangsters, communists and even socialists, and orchestrated a coup against Mossadegh, and they dragged him and hanged him. And then they installed Shah of Iran. Mm-hmm. That's how Shah of Iran came into power. Mm-hmm. So Iran has been a playing ground for the Western intelligence agencies for long now. And particularly because of this particular government, which is maintaining its own independent stance, which is a thorn on the side of the Americans in the region. Definitely they would try to do that. It's very predictable. Americans are now trying to ride the wave of emotions in the region to give the perception it's an indigenous revolt in Iran. It is not orchestrated just like it was in Egypt, but just that in Egypt, people were fed up of Hosni Mubarak. So they came out in millions. In Iran, they're not fed up of their leadership. That's why they came out in hundreds, you know. Mm-hmm. And that's where you can see the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, one of the things that we discussed on the program last night with your compatriot Raja is that the two big elephants that Israel and America want to bag in this exercise are, number one, Pakistan, and number two, Iran. Pakistan, obviously, because it has nuclear weapons and because it is such a strong Islamic country, meaning you have this perfect wedding between religion and state. And Iran, for the simple reason that she will not be bullied or pushed around by Israel and the United States the way that these other countries are. And I think that what they are more afraid of than anything is some type of partnership between Iran and Pakistan, bringing together two countries, one Sunni and one Shia. And so this would obviously frustrate the plans they have for religious and sectarian splits and violence and things like that. So if you would please talk about that a little bit as well. Why are they so worried about Iran that they have to topple that government?
You you see, you are right here, Glenn, because this is the ultimate nightmare for the Americans and the NATO, that Pakistan and Iran form a strategic collective security arrangement. And this would be a complete nightmare. It would completely throw the entire American game plan in the region topsy-turvy, because there are 150,000 American and Western troops and Blackwaters in Afghanistan right now. And there are 84% supply lines. 84%, mark my words, supply lines include from toilet paper to helicopters. Everything go from Pakistan. The NATO supply line is from Pakistan. And the 60% fuel that they use in Afghanistan, the Americans and the NATO that they're using again go from Pakistan. So just imagine if the Pakistani supply line, the supply route from Pakistan is blocked due to any reason, either due to anarchy, either due to public sentiment, or due to a strategic alliance between Pakistan and Iran, 150,000 Western troops in Afghanistan would be dead meat. And the entire U.S. game plan in the region of staying in Afghanistan and trying to come down southward through Balochistan into the Gulf waters. And from one side they are encircling Iran also, and from one side they're encircling Pakistan, and then they're in the soft belly of China and the soft belly of Central Asia. Afghanistan is the most strategic location for the entire Asia right now, but the American presence there depends upon Pakistan's support. And that is why they fear that if Pakistan and Iran, they can join. Iran is already a ideologically motivated government, though they are not nuclear weapon state, but they are a very strong nation because of the cohesiveness of that society. In Pakistan, we have a very organized, very disciplined armed forces. In fact, the force that is keeping this federation together are the armed forces, which are not secular, which are ideologically motivated, which are pro-Islam, anti-American, anti-Indian, and they are the source of stability in the region. And these armed forces are also nuclear weapon. It's a nuclear weapon force. So now, if again the fear that they have is that what if Pakistan and Iran get into a more closer defensive cooperation? As I said, the collective security arrangement. So while they have a corrupt government in Pakistan and they're working feverishly to dismember the Pakistani state, inshallah they will never be able to do that, because the people have understood the game and the armed forces are united and they've understood this game. But in Iran, that's why they are very aggressive. They have to topple that government in quick time, because the more they waste time, the more they delay, the possibility that either Iran becomes a nuclear weapon state or Pakistan gets rid of this democracy and a patriotic government comes in Pakistan, which forges an alliance with Iran and other regional countries like Saudi Arabia and Turkey and China and Russia. And this kind of security block is something they're trying to prevent. This region, if you notice, Mark, this region has many nuclear weapon states in close proximity. Russia is a nuclear weapon state, China is, Pakistan is, India is, and Iran is becoming one. So this region is the most explosive and volatile. And of course, Americans are sitting in the heart of it, in Afghanistan. So you can actually see that while they reshape the Middle East, their actual focus of the Americans would be on Pakistan and on a secondary level on Iran. And that is why, because in Pakistan, they've already annihilated the political government. The political government is totally pro-American. They're doing whatever the Americans are telling them to do. But in Iran, that's not the case. So naturally, Iran is the target now.
Amazing. Zaid, I know that it is late where you are. I feel terrible about dragging you out of bed to do this program. And but to say that your analysis today is interesting is like there just isn't that's the understatement of the new year. This is absolutely one of the most fascinating discussions I've ever been a part of. If you would please just spend a couple of moments of the last what's left of the program letting the people know what they need to know in order to form an accurate picture. If there's anything left that you did not mention earlier, please let us know what we need to know in order to better understand what's going on right now.
You see, one thing is that often the world media projects Pakistan as the epicenter of terror and say that Pakistan is a failing state and they should take away the nuclear weapons from Pakistan. This would be the greatest blunder humanity would do if Pakistan is brought under pressure, if the civil society and the patriotic element and the people who are seeking the truth, the alternate media, they must see through the Zionist game. They must see through the fact that Pakistan remains the last obstacle in the Israel's and Zionist and Newcon's expansion plan in the Greater Middle East. Because Pakistani armed forces train the armed forces of the entire Middle Eastern Muslim countries. Pakistan in the past have always been called, when the Israel had attacked Egypt and Syria in 67 and 74, they had requested Pakistan for help. And Pakistani air defense units, Pakistani fighter pilots had gone to Egypt and Syria. And Pakistan is the only Muslim country in the world which have shot down Israeli aircraft in air-to-air combat. This is something that nobody knows in the world. And that is why the Israelis are terribly scared of Pakistan. We have a history of shooting them down. We have a history of defending the Arab land. And that is why we say that we need, in Pakistan, we need the support from all the freedom-loving people. People who love justice, honor and dignity and want to live in peace. Pakistan is the center of gravity. So your focus must remain in protecting and defending Pakistan as the last bastion, the last fortress for true freedom in the world. The projection that they give in the Western media is cunning, is evil, is sinister, is a propaganda disinformation war against the Pakistani state. And Indians, of course, are riding the Western tide. They are riding the Western emotions against Pakistan, and they want to get Pakistan beaten up from the West. And in reality, the Pakistan is not just stabilizing Asia, but also the Middle East and the Greater Middle East. This is my last word. Pakistan remains, we fight for you, we live here, we are in the eye of the storm. We are living here and fighting here for the freedom of entire humanity, for your freedom. We are all on board this common war. We are fighting for justice and freedom against this oppression of Zionists and Newcons, and for which they have waged these wars in the world. We continue to resist, we live with dignity, and when the time comes, we'll die with honor.
Zaid, I cannot thank you enough for coming on the program and giving us, my goodness, I feel like I just won the lottery with this program. If you would please just hold on there for just a second. I need to close out the program, but I want to talk to you off the air, so just sit tight for just a moment. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as I am fond of saying, I knew it was going to be a good program. I didn't know it was going to be that good. I want to thank my very good friend, I think our very good friend, Zaid Hamid, whose works you can access yourself by going to brasstaxtv.pk. Ladies and gentlemen, my head is spinning. There's really not more I can say other than that. We are truly blessed to have a mind like this and a mouth like this on the program, and hopefully God will protect him so that he can continue on in his work and come back on. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that is it for today. Thank you for attending. As I am fond of saying, go out and do what you can to save what is left of this damaged and dying world. If not for yourself, then certainly for those who are going to follow in your footsteps. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, keep the faith.
The fact of the matter is, we are coming from a country that experiences terror daily. Our purpose was to document the event. The fact of the matter is, we are coming from a country that experiences terror daily. Our purpose was to document the event. The fact of the matter is, we are coming from a country that experiences terror daily. Our purpose was to document the event. Our purpose was to document the event. Our purpose was to document the event. Our purpose was to document the event.